Hey guys, welcome back to Let's Talk. Today I'm going to go straight into the episode because from my last episode I realized that I talk a lot. But first I just want to thank everyone who tuned into my last episode where we were speaking about validation. Today I want to talk about comparison and how having an unhealthy level of comparison can cause you to feel inferior, and then in turn you're not going to really want to do anything because you feel inferior. So if we look at the definition of comparison, comparison is when you're looking at similarities or differences between things. In relation to a person is where you are evaluating yourself in relation to others. So you're evaluating your attitude, your abilities, or your trait in comparison to another person. A healthy level of comparison is okay because it can actually cause you to feel inspired or motivate you to want to achieve certain things. But when it's an unhealthy amount of comparison, it can actually make you feel insecure about your current position. And if I was to use an example, I started comparing myself at a very, very young age, and it actually started when my dad left. And I have sisters from my dad's side, and they grew up with him. So when he left, as a young child, the way I processed it was he chose my sisters over me. So that means they were superior to me, or they were better than me. They had something that I didn't have. And that was the narrative that I kind of created for myself. And so as a child, I would, hey, if they're listening, I would stalk my sisters basically on Facebook. I would see what they, I would look through their pictures to see what they look like, to see, some of the things that they could do. And even though I had like a very deep desire to know them, there was also, I think there was like a deep resentment inside of me because they had what I desired to have, and that was our father. And it kind of took me down a rabbit hole because that's where it all started. All of this comparison, it took me down a rabbit hole where I would now later on in life just compare myself, compare my looks, compare abilities and singing abilities in every area of my life. Now there was some sort of comparison where I felt that there were people better than me, and so because of that I was inadequate. And with comparison, there are three types of comparison. So there's upward comparison, and this is when you are comparing yourself to someone you perceive to be better than or who is performing better than you. There's downward comparison, and this is where you're comparing yourself to someone who again you perceive is doing or is performing worse than you. And there's like lateral comparison and this is when you're comparing yourself to someone who you more or less think you're equals, you're basically on the same level. And in this episode, I want to talk about upward comparison. So like the word is where you feel like someone is doing better than you, hence the word, upward, looking up. And this type of comparison can actually have a positive effect because let's say you see someone that looks like you, someone that has a similar skill set, someone that has a similar story. Let's say they've gone through this maybe similar things to you, and you see that they are excelling in certain things. That will give you an upward drive, and it will actually show you that there are certain things that you can achieve. It will show that, let's say, you were abandoned by your father, or you were molested as a child, or you did drugs, or you had like a certain lifestyle. And if you see that there was someone that was in a similar situation as you, and if you see that they have come out of it, and you see that they are excelling, you see that they have achieved their goals, it can now inspire you, motivate you, and encourage you to also believe that you can achieve certain goals as well. And so then it kind of makes you curious about how they did it. And then you kind of will go down that route of you will now start setting realistic goals, and you're going to like focus on improving yourself. So because the comparison is not that, you feel like this person is superior, and because they're superior, I'm inferior. When you're thinking like that, your focus is more on the other person rather than yourself. But when let's say you're kind of secure, you'll start focusing more on like self-improving, how you can improve yourself so that you can reach these certain goals. There's a healthy balance. it becomes a problem now when you see this person as being superior to you, and because you see them as being superior to you, you now feel inferior, and then you start feeling inadequate, you start feeling insecure, you're comparing yourself to them, and you end up kind of digging yourself into a deeper hole. And the problem with when you feel inferior is that there will always be a mental block. Like, you just won't be able to, like, you can't even fathom attaining the level of excellence that you desire. It's almost like wishful thinking. It's like a dream so far away that it can never become a reality. And you are now, let's say, displeased with where you are. Now, don't get me wrong. It's okay to be dissatisfied with where you currently are, because let's say where there's dissatisfaction, you know that, okay, maybe there's a problem, and you will work towards bettering yourself. It becomes a problem now when you start to blur the lines between location and identity. So what I mean by that, okay, for example, maybe right now, currently, you do not have money. That's your circumstance. That's not who you are. It doesn't now mean you are a broke person. No, it's just right now, in this situation, I do not have money. It does not mean that I'm someone that, let's say, cannot build wealth, or I'm someone that will not have money in the future. It's where you are. It is not who you are. But the problem is, if your benchmark, your standard, if it's someone else's success, you will constantly sabotage yourself, and in turn now you'll start to breed like resentment towards people who are, let's say, quote unquote, doing better than you. And then you will start competing with people that can never be your competition, because no one can do you better than you can do you. And this is something that I'll really emphasize, because it's so true. No one can do you better than you. You're competing against people that cannot compete against you. You're competing against people where you cannot compete with them, because you cannot do them better than they can do them, and they cannot do you better than you can do you. And when you feel inferior, sometimes you just won't trust the skills that you have, or you don't trust that you can do certain things, and then you will start using methods that maybe are not suited for you. You're using methods that you're not meant to use, that you're using methods that worked for someone else, or it worked for the person that you're comparing yourself with, and then you try to do it, and then you end up not being true to yourself, and then maybe it just doesn't work out for you. And this comparison, like upward comparison that I'm talking about, it actually reminds me of the story of David and Goliath. So in 1 Samuel 17, and this story, I'm not gonna lie, you can gain many lessons from this story, but I want to just basically talk about in regards to the comparison. So I feel like this is a good example of what upward comparison could be. On paper, Saul would probably be seen as superior to David, and Goliath would also seem superior to David as well. So if we look at, let's say, physically, Saul was a tall man. Saul was tall. David was obviously smaller. Saul had the finest armor and the finest weapons. David had a slingshot and stones. Saul had a title. Saul was king. David was, a shepherd. He currently did not have a title. Even when David nominated himself to say, I will fight, I will slay Goliath, Saul looked at David and was like, you cannot fight this Philistine. You cannot fight this giant, because you are a youth. You are a young person. And this giant has been a man of war from his youth. Why? Again, I'll emphasize, on paper, Saul and Goliath were superior to David. Because let's say you're in battle, or you're going to, you want to, let's say someone's coming to you and you want to fight. I'm not, advocating that you should fight. But let's just hypothetically, you say someone is coming, they want to fight. And there are two people that, that you can choose from. That, you're choosing the person who's going to fight for you. And there's this one, big bulky person, one big bulky guy. They look like they can deadlift 10,000 kg, like they're very big. And then you see another person, maybe they're just a little bit small, Maybe they're a little bit quiet, they're a little bit, they just don't look as strong. I mean, let me just say that they just don't look as strong. You'll probably go for the bigger guy because, again, on paper, with your eyes, they look like they can get the job done. Now, let's say David had taken in all these things. Let's say David had taken in the fact that, okay, you're right, Goliath has been a man of war from his youth. He probably would feel inadequate, and the outcome could have been completely different. But what did David do? David didn't compare himself to the people. He compared the situation with previous situations that he had been through and that he had overcome. So and excelled in. He killed the lion, he killed the bear. And so because he compared this situation to previous situations that he had excelled in his mind, this situation was no different. This situation was a piece of cake because he had evidence to prove that he has the ability to also overcome this mountain. And so then now when Saul offered him his armor and offered him his sword, and David wore it and he rejected it because he said that I have not tested this. Again, in the eyes of others, right? It would have, in the eyes of others, you're about to fight a giant. It would make sense for you to wear the armor and for you to wear the sword. That method seemed to make sense. But David had not tested it. That was not the method for him. David stayed true to himself because he knew that that's not what he was meant to use. He used what was in his hands. And that's what many people forget, that, okay, there are certain abilities, there are certain skills, there are certain things that God has literally physically put in your hands. But because you're comparing yourself to someone else, you are trying to do it the way someone else is doing it. And you're going to fail because that is not the way that you are meant to do it. That's not the method you are meant to use. You are meant to use what is in your hand. And outside looking in, it may be the unconventional route. Outside looking in, I'm pretty sure when he picked up the stones and he had the slingshot, they were side-eyeing him saying, what is this guy doing? But he used what was in his hand. He took the slingshot, he took the stone, and he defeated Goliath. Now, if you are comparing yourself to the point that you are making yourself feel inferior, you can basically cause yourself to try a method that was not created for you. And so that's why I'm using, David and Goliath, because David rejected the sword and the armor and he used the slingshot and he defeated Goliath. So what I'm basically trying to say is that other people's successes, other people's skills, their talents, their titles should not make you feel inferior, because your aim is to not be like them. Your aim is to excel at being you. And I'll say it again and again and again. No one can do you better than you can do you. Your aim is to excel at being yourself. David excelled at being him. And that's why he could stand boldly before Goliath with God and a slingshot and a stone and bring down that giant. Yeah. So the moment you stand boldly with God and with the things that he has put inside of your hands, you will see those giants, those mountains fall before you. You will see that you will be doing things that you never thought that you would be doing, just because you used what was in your hands. So I just basically want to remind you that you are not inferior, and you don't need anyone else. You don't need to be like anyone else to excel. All you need to be is you. No one is your competition, because no one can compete with you. And so this episode is, again, to encourage someone that if you are comparing yourself, and you're comparing yourself to the point that you are making yourself feel inadequate, you're making yourself feel inferior, I need you to know that, one, everyone has different starting points. Just because someone has done something a certain way doesn't mean that's the exact route that you're meant to take as well. And so I just want to ask you a question. What is in your hands? What is it that is in your hands that you can use? What has God placed in your hands? Again, it's same with Moses. God asked him a question. What is in your hand? And that's the question I want to leave with you. What is in your hands? See? Nice, short and simple, guys. I think I did very well today. But thank you for tuning in and for listening, and I will see you at the next episode.